Good. Okay. Hi, everyone. So, welcome. This will be our last live show. However, we will be continuing the show weekly and just doing pre-recorded. But we are in phase 2 of entering back into New York City. So, with all of that and timing, it's going to be a little harder to do live shows. But again, we'll be pre-recorded. So, I'm really excited. We've done 21 shows now over the past few months. Amy, you're our final guest on our live show. So I want to introduce my guest, Amy Holtzman. Amy is the CEO and president of Essential Leadership, which is a multi-generational, she's a multi-generational philanthropy advisor and a leadership coach. And Amy's also one of my closest, dearest, and oldest friends. So, Amy, how are you?
I'm good, Stephen. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thank you for doing this.
Nice to see you in this way.
Likewise. Although I can't see you, I just keep seeing myself. Which I don't need to see myself. I know what I look like.
It's nice for you to see you this way.
What's that?
Nice for you to see you this way.
I guess so. Anyway, so I wanted to, Amy, tell me, let's just, before we get into it, so just full disclosure, Amy, we've known each other 38 years.
Oh my God.
How's that?
We're not that old.
What's that?
We're not that old.
No. I guess not. Yeah, that feels funny. I heard someone once say that when they think of 20 years ago, they think of the 70s. So
wow.
It's not the 70s, it's the 90s. But Amy, tell me what I said about all that. I want to talk about you, and we'll get into philanthropy and so much of what's going on in the world today. But first, how did you get to where you are right now, having your own company? Just give us a little bit of the buildup and what you did prior.
Yeah, so a lot of it comes back to the ways that your life and my life have intersected also. And I could probably pinpoint it to a time when I went to Israel, actually.
Wow.
And I went to Israel in the early 90s. And I had such tremendous wanderlust, and I was looking sort of what my life would be. And I had born and raised in Philadelphia, so I was looking for a way to get out. And when I got out and I was traveling in Israel, I had some perspective. And I knew at that point that I wanted to come home and, as trite as it may sound now, but really make a difference.
Right.
Looking for a way to make an impact. And the community that I identified as Philadelphia was incredibly important to me. As you know, I met, fell in love with, and married one of your closest friends. Yes. And he was also a Philadelphian. So we knew Philadelphia would be home.
We can name him, Amy.
We can?
Yes, your current husband, you've been married to for over 25 years. Yes,
so I married Kenny Holtzman, yes, and he was one of your dearest friends and remains one of your dearest friends. And long story short, I ended up working for an organization here in Philadelphia called Leadership Philadelphia. And the goal of Leadership Philadelphia at that time was to take executives that were at the midpoint in their careers. They had been spending their energy and their effort and their time building their careers and their families, but they were looking for something more. So they were looking for that missing third leg of the stool, which turned out to be civic engagement, which turned out to be board service, which turned out to be some issue or interest that really inspired them. Mm-hmm. And leadership took those mid-level executives and put them on boards of directors of nonprofits. So that was my orientation to professional life in Philly.
What year was this? This was right after college?
Yeah, so I started in 92.
Right.
Stayed there for 7 years.
Okay.
And when I left there, I left to run a nonprofit on my own that was providing money and college prep support for low-income Philadelphians. Mm-hmm. And so I ran the nonprofit for more than a decade. I sort of cut my teeth in nonprofit leadership and management there. And the reason I stayed there until I felt like I could no longer build or grow or contribute, and I wanted to allow somebody else to come in and do that work,
Yep.
And I went and led a family foundation, the name of the McGuire Foundation, for 5 years, and left there. And then this is where it wraps up and really answers your question. So given all those experiences, and had become a leadership coach along the way, and done a lot of education, certifications, just really followed my interest, followed my passions, I determined that I was going to build something from that point that incorporated all the different elements of my skill set, my interest, my passion. And I'm looking at a diagram now that shows the intersection of what you love, what you do well, what the world needs, and what the world will pay for. And that's called, in other circumstances, it's called ikigai. It's a Japanese term, and it's the intersection of those four things. And through the building,
what you love,
what you do well,
yes,
what the world needs, and what the world will pay for.
So it's funny when I think about, if I had to think about you just as my friend and your personality and what now you do. And I remember now you've had your own, company going for a couple of years now, a few years now, but I remember saying to you, oh, this is perfect. This all makes sense. And as I know you and I both believe everything in life happens for a reason and leads us to where we need to be. Clearly, I mean, you're in the most perfect role that I think you could possibly be. And I'm sure your clients feel that as well.
I hope so. That's how it feels. I mean, it feels that building something, I have never felt so passionate and that it's so right, because I'm just relying on every skill set that I built along the way as a tool for what my clients need.
That's wonderful. So tell me what you mentioned those things, and I remember, and I know you have techniques and how you do this. So your clients are philanthropists, families. Tell us a little bit about that. I want to talk about your business. I want to talk about how you do that. I mean, certainly you're involved with people that have the capacity to make a huge difference of their time, their energy, their resources, financial resources. And then after, I want to get into more just, grassroots giving and what anyone can do.
Sure. So my clients are, it varies, right? I've worked with individuals who have small family foundations who just want to figure out what they care about. So I call that mission, vision, and values work. So how do they there's so many issues in the world. I mean, we're facing this today, and every time you turn, there's a new crisis that's of magnificent proportions. And people have said to me constantly, I want to do something, and where do I start? So I work with people from running small family foundations, people who are at that similar position that they were when I was working for leadership, who say, like, there's got to be more than this. How do I engage? And then I work with people who are either starting, creating, building family foundations and engaging the next generation. So we work together to determine what the family, so now we've gone beyond the individual unit and figure what the family unit cares about, and their mission, vision, and values.
And that can be, I mean, because you can have families that I know studies have shown what, one generation certainly cares about, the second or third generation may have no interest in. And that I know there's very well-known nonprofits that had a certain mission, and they're either not relevant now, or they're just, the board or family is choosing to take them in a different direction.
That's right. So there's many circumstances where families might find themselves at a point where they're going to go one direction or they're going to go another. But ultimately, they want to see if they can work together as a family. So I guide them through a process of what is it that you care about. We start with their values. And I think when you talk about the tools, I like to consider myself a philanthropy coach, by the way. And so I both coach and advise. But the reason I say that is because the coaching modality allows people to tap into what really matters to them. I could come and I could give my advice all day long, but if it's not unique to them, it's not sustainable. So I work a lot on the front end with people to determine what they truly care about and then build out from there. So it's a lot of internal deep dive work until we get to sort of the issues. So I think there's not a lot of people know that they look for that, but when they engage me, oftentimes we really start with that internal deep dive.
That's so interesting. And certainly, I mean, you're playing a coach, a therapist. You really do again, anyone and everyone can give. Can give and hopefully should give. You mentioned Israel. I remember the first time when I was living in Israel, when I went to save Kurt from the cold. Heather and I went. Anyway, I was in Israel and I'm learning in yeshiva, and I'm living in the old city of Jerusalem, and we had just learned about tzedakah and chesed, about giving charity and tithing. And I remember coming back after this class and thinking, oh, someday when I'm successful and have a lot of money, I'll give a lot of charity. I'll give 10% or whatever I'll choose to give. And then within a moment, I had that thought that, no, it just doesn't happen that way. It just doesn't start when you have money. You can't just, you have to train your muscle. You start now when you have a little or whatever you have. And then as you have more, God willing, you'll give more. And in that moment, I remember it was like, I just had this epiphany that you have to start now. It's not all of a sudden when you become successful.
Right.
Or have the means. So anyway, it's funny when you mentioned Israel, my whole understanding, I grew up in a family that they're caring and they're givers, but it wasn't like they understood the culture of giving, where the people we're talking about much more, and you see it more nowadays, there's a culture of giving. People understand the culture of giving, whether it be financially or of time.
Right. But the truth is, it's hard work. So I've had clients that are sort of the ultra high net worth clients that have come to me and said, I don't know how to do this. I don't know where to start. And particularly ultra high net worth clients who may get noticed because their gifts are going to be larger. Mm-hmm. They want to do it right. And while there is no one way, there's a way that you can build a strategy, not only around what's important to you, but sort of what logically makes sense. So for instance, can I give you a for instance?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
yeah.
For instance, as everybody remembers, in mid-March, the world changed and COVID broke out. And I had a number of clients who wanted to be responsive. And so I worked with them to determine, what that strategy looks like. So in one case, a small business owner wanted to support other small businesses, actually somebody who does work with a lot of small businesses. It made sense to not only support food insecurity, which everybody was suffering from, mm-hmm. but to stay upstream for a little while longer and to make sure that people who may be at risk of losing jobs or be furloughed continue to earn an income so that they could, stay off the food lines for a bit longer, right. Maintain their dignity, pay their rent. So we really built a strategy that involved supporting small businesses. And then what was the next strategy? The next strategy was determining how to keep people maintaining their basic needs and focusing on their basic needs. And that was sort of in the food insecurity effort. So there was strands and strategies, and for others, it was around voting and democracy. So you kind of have to stay connected to where the levers are for change. Mm-hmm. And it's not a one size fits all. It's something that really is unique to the individual and the families that are working together.
So I know we speak often, and clearly, and we've been in touch a lot during the last few months. Your business, your model, you've been busier than ever. And in some ways, it's a luxury when you're planning your giving, especially large gifts and, or a foundation mission statement, or what's our plan. This all happened and people really had to step up, and it almost like put everything in hyper, high gear to say, great, we were planning to work this all through and discuss this. We really need to act quickly.
Call to action. I think this was a complete call to action. And I saw it pivot from COVID to issues of racial justice. Again, people who weren't motivated, even people in families that are younger, I would say next gen, I would say my own children are motivated to action, whether that includes giving or, dollars or time. Look, the other thing that I talk about is engaging with your 4 T's, which is time, talent, treasure, and ties.
Is that a dog that just ran by?
It is. There's 3 of them and they're about to bark, and I'm about to put it on mute, but hopefully that won't happen. They're standing.
One of the kids is going to run down. So I'm sorry, you were talking about the T's, right?
Yeah, 4 T's. So time, talent, treasure, and ties. And if you don't have, sometimes there's times in your life where you have more time than you have treasure. And particularly young people that have time to protest and have time to engage and have time to send $25 to a local organization, whether it be a bail project or Black Lives Matter. I would say now is the time that people may have been looking for a cause before, and not all people, but some people, at least that I've become aware of, have said like, now is the time. So time is of the essence, but it's also a time to mobilize people at the time when they feel inspired to act.
Right. Yeah, that's when that's when they dive in. Otherwise, you're in essence pushing them rather than them taking their own lead.
Yeah, and in many cases, I've been dictating the pace, slow, steady pace up until March, and then in March, people at varying degrees, people were ready to take off. And again, some in sort of a family element, some decided they really wanted to focus on how they were going to govern their foundations, and others decided they were going to determine their grant making. So it was really the governance and grant making strategy.
So you talk about time as one of the T's. I remember years ago, Kenny, your husband, Kenny, who's been in nonprofit for many years, ran Arthur Ashe and now has Philadelphia Youth Basketball Organization, that he and I talked about Jeff Schwartz, who was the CEO of the family that owned Timberland.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
They have since sold it, and he's a full-time philanthropist, but that he not only tithes his finances, but also his time. And Kenny and I were talking the other day about, we were talking about a gift that he got, a significant gift that he got for his organization, and said, but even more impressive is how much time this particular gentleman is giving me, his own wisdom and leadership. It goes so far. I know we're, on the board of the JCC, and our current president is, I'm amazed. I mean, certainly she's very generous with their financial resources, but the time and how involved she is, it's impressive. I think that's harder in many cases than just writing a check.
Well, it's just as valuable. I mean, I've talked about this with a number of my clients. It requires thinking not only what they want to give their money and their resources to, but how they want to show up as a leader in civic life. Do they want to lend their voice by writing op-eds, by advocating for a certain issue, by serving on a board? There's a number of things to consider, particularly when it comes time to leaving a legacy, right? So it's, what legacy do you want to leave behind? Is it your name and your company that you're affiliated with? That might be the way.
Right.
And there's that end, and there's this other piece of how we all show up. And for some people, it's how they've engaged in their community and in civic life.
So you touched on a name, and how you choose what you want to put your energy to. If you have someone who is not comfortable putting their name forward, do you ever, I don't want to say push, but encourage someone, put your name, I want to have your name out here for this because of the ripple effect that it might have, or all your friends will now give, or something. I'm sure you come across that.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yes. I mean, people are funny about that, and that's an individual preference, right? So, do I want my name out there? Do I not? Do I want to give anonymously? Do I not? In some cases, the desire to give anonymously comes from a really good place, right? Like, I don't really want my name attached. And so, in that case, when you come back to the values exercise that I work with, recognition is very low on their values list, that's right? So, however, the case that I make, and I wouldn't say push, but the case that I make is, instead of looking at it like this is something that feeds your ego, perhaps this is something that helps the cause because you're now involved with the cause. And again, your friends will come, So when they look at it as something that they could leverage resources for a cause, it often shifts that perspective. But oftentimes it really comes from a desire just to have no recognition. Like, I have so many clients who say, we don't want any recognition. We don't want our names on buildings. We don't want that. And others who think it's just fine.
Well, they say it's the highest form of giving is to give anonymously. But certainly What did someone, it's still a good deed or a mitzvah, even if your name's on the building. You're still
Right.
doing incredible,
Right. And to your point, sometimes it could actually be helpful. If
Yes.
you shift your thinking on what that does for the organization. We see it in galas all the time. If there's a name on a gala that people want to be associated with, oftentimes more and more of that person's friends and associates and colleagues join in. If it was
That's right.
anonymous, you wouldn't have that kind of success.
That's true. That's very true. All right. Someone is texting me a question. We're getting a lot of questions and I'm kind of peppering them in what we're discussing, but this has come through twice. Our kids are giving with their volume. We as Gen X could not possibly make this impact. Super proud of our Zs. Oh, okay.
That's true. That's happening now, right? Generation Z are showing up and they're letting their voice be heard. And again, I don't know if you read this, I guess it was last week in the New York Times. Some of these organizations are supporting racial justice were overfunded. I have never in my life seen organizations say, don't give us any more money. In this particular case, it was the National Bail Fund. In this particular case, there were some local organizations that received so much money in such a short period of time. They then recommended community organizations that were doing work of liberation in this case that could also use the funds. I had literally never seen that happen.
That is phenomenal.
Yeah, so those were large and small and Gen X and Gen Z and everyone was involved.
Just so you know, that comment was from Julia Beck.
Hi, Julia.
who introduced Kirk and I. So
it all comes full circle.
It all comes back to Philadelphia. We're the suburbs of Philadelphia. That's okay. So that's a perfect lead in. So we're talking about, you have your clients, you have these families, you guide them, you have their different generations. I know you, as we talked about, your techniques, your tools, the things that you bring to them that you did with me, that game where we played with the cards. And it was hard, actually, where I had to narrow down and really choose what my 4 core values were. It wasn't so easy.
It's not easy.
No, it really makes you dig deep. So tell me, so your boys are of that generation. What are you feeling from them? What's different than when we were their age? Now, obviously, we're going through something we didn't go through. So.
Yeah, well, that's what's different, right? So it's a moment. I think when we were growing up, we looked back at the civil rights movement and thought, oh, well, that's done. As far as I know, we didn't have a defining moment in our growing up. That's really what the 80s were known for, right? Like there wasn't a whole lot of angst.
It was this polo shirts turned up and
at least where we grew up. Parts of the country and the world were different, but now, what am I feeling from my boys? I feel it really strongly. There's a very strong bent to the Black Lives Matter movement in my house right now, an education around how, from them to me, sort of how we got here, different thoughts than I originally had about the police and the need for police reform. It's a real, and they're getting their education probably primarily from social media and beyond, right? I'd like to think they have other resources where they're getting their information and not completely relying on social media. But it's, the time is now. It's don't sit on the sidelines. It's we got to do something. So whether that's social media posting or going to protest or giving money or continuing to learn and continuing to educate others, it's real. And that's how I see it with my clients and I see it in my house.
You can feel it. People are really, it's funny, we have Lily, who's 9. I think she is more aware than certainly I was at 9. And I think it's not just her. I think her whole group of friends, it's just a different, you're right, we're living in a different time. And
I think what's different, and then I've explained some of this to my clients, what's certainly different about racial justice versus COVID is COVID was an immediate response. COVID was, we can feed people now. We can get people earning, we can get them money for their income now. We can do everything now. The arc is going to be long, and we went from relief, we're going to recovery and rebuilding and reimagining. We're doing all that. With racial justice, there's a way that, as I said, their organizations are overfunded and they've done a tremendous job fundraising, but there's diversity, equity, and inclusion. how that factors into philanthropy. It's a longer road to build systems that support racial justice versus an immediate contribution just to solve the problem. So, so this is a longer game we're playing now with my clients about how to incorporate diversity, equity, and inclusion in philanthropy. And they're deep and challenging conversations, and there's no quick fix, and they have to keep happening.
So what's surprised you most about a client or a reaction, hopefully for the positive? That's where I'm going.
Well, people are different places of learning. You know, there are different places on a learning curve. There are different points on a learning curve. And I have to remember that people have different orientations and get their news from a variety of different sources. And I live in Mount Airy. I have a very progressive news feed. I live in a very progressive house, and not everybody has that orientation. And while I think everybody wants to learn, not everybody is at the same place. And my job is to guide my clients with the knowledge that I have to get where they want to go. Sometimes with some more gentle or even more insistent nudging. But my goal is to get them where they want to go, which puts back the coach piece into it rather than a particular agenda that I want to put upon them.
Right. Got it. Okay, great. Julia Beck says you saved her life, but I don't know. Do you want to explain that?
I forget the story. She remembers it better than I do, but I think there's some truth to that.
Should we just talk about Philadelphia now? So, all right, that pretty much wraps it up. I do want to ask you, during this time where you've been quarantined, and I know now the boys are with you, but what have been some of the silver linings?
It's my question, Stephen. I ask that of all my clients.
No, you didn't even tell me that.
Oh gosh. Well, the last 3 weeks or 2.5 weeks have been a silver lining with Greg, my son, coming home from California. We hadn't seen him in 6 months.
Who was living with Andy Abowitz, also from Philadelphia.
Right, previously. But he lives on his own in LA, and he's been there for 6 months, and he never would have had the opportunity to come home for 3 weeks. So he's come home. You know, everybody's working in the house. Both my sons.
Everyone's at their corner.
Everyone's at their corner, and it's really nice to walk around during the day and see everybody kind of at their corner and being productive. I love productivity. It's probably one of my top values. And I would also say this work. I mean, this work has been I am the most professionally satisfied that I've ever been, because I really feel that this is a moment that we can take advantage of and can have a tremendous ripple effect on the end users, right? The people for whose lives this is going to change. It has the power, the work that doing with people and philanthropists has the power to make real change. And I completely driven by it. So I've got this small corner office upstairs next to my bedroom, and I'm really quite satisfied with what I'm doing.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
And you're doing good work. You're guiding and getting people to their inner and greatest core values, and hopefully making a huge difference in the world. So you make a difference in my life, Amy Holtzman.
Thank you, Stephen.
Amy Tress Holtzman. So.
Thanks, Stephen.
Anyway, thank you for doing this.
Thank you.
That was easy, right?
Yeah, totally easy.
All right. And thank you everyone for tuning in. We will see you pre-recorded next week, but tune in for Tim's last live show this Thursday, June 25th at 7 p.m. Tim will have Tamron Hall from the Today Show and her own show on, and they're going to be talking about impact and Black Lives Matter. So just continuing the theme. All right. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Bye, Amy.
Bye.